All right. So as everyone is filing in, I will get kind of the boring housekeeping stuff out of the way so we can get to the good stuff. Thank you all for coming, for attending a virtual event on a Saturday, no less, for Bookstore Romance Day to celebrate all things romance. This is a wonderful little pet project that I love to run every year. This is my third year doing panels. So excited. For those of you who don't know, I am Amanda. I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. I'm also their events coordinator, and I am a romance reviewer. I have been working for the romance website, Smart Bitches Trashy Books, it'll be a decade in the fall. So I've been reading romance for a very long time. I've been interacting with romance for a very long time. And I just love talking to romance writers. I love interacting with readers. So I'm especially joyful to be moderating this panel with 3 contemporary romance authors. A bit about how the event works. I will introduce everyone. We will have a discussion about the genre and their titles. And then we're going to have a Q&A. If you haven't attended a virtual event on Zoom before, there should be a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 little speech bubbles. You can submit your questions there whenever you have them. You don't have to wait until we start Q&A. You can kind of start whenever, and we will get to the questions when it's Q&A time. That usually starts after like 45 minutes of talking. But depending on how many questions we have pending, happy to get started earlier. So feel free to send them in for any of the authors that we have on panel. I'm going to introduce everyone. We're going to start with Danielle. Go by last name alphabetical. That is the easy way to do it. So we'll start with Danielle Jackson, who is a contemporary romance author, avid reader, lackluster yet mighty crafter, and accomplished TV binge watcher. Once upon a time, she was a publicist in publishing. I was too. I feel that pain very acutely. And continues to cultivate her love of books and reading by chatting with the best authors in the business as an events coordinator at an independent bookstore. And as the co-host of the Fresh Fiction podcast, she also moderates panels, interviews authors, and hosts a romance book club. Danielle lives in Chicagoland with her very own romance hero husband, darling daughter, and 2 tempestuous cats. You can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at djacksonbooks. So before we move on, Danielle, would you like to tell us about your book, The Accidental Pinup?
I got it right here. I remember, usually I don't have it. It's like across the room or downstairs, but I have it. Yeah, The Accidental Pinup. It's my debut contemporary romance. It is set in Chicago, and it is about a boudoir and pinup photographer who finds herself in front of the camera starring in a lingerie ad campaign, and the person that they hire to take her photos is her biggest professional rival, a fellow photographer who has kind of always gotten picked over her to get like big, like high profile jobs and things in Chicagoland and some national ad campaigns as well. And, you know, they have to figure out how to work together. They both have their reasons for needing and wanting creative control over the ad campaign. And then they start hanging out all the time, and those pesky things called feelings get in the way. And they both have some things they have to kind of work through, but I think it's a lot of fun, and it's super sexy. And I got to create the lingerie like line of my dreams, which was really cool. And yeah, that's about it.
All right. And then we're going to move on to Abby. Abby Jimenez is a Food Network winner, USA Today and New York Times bestselling author, and recipient of the 2022 Minnesota Book Award for her novel Life's Too Short. Abby founded Nadia Cakes out of her home kitchen back in 2007. The bakery has since gone on to win numerous Food Network competitions and has amassed an international cult following. Abby loves a good romance, coffee, doglets, and not leaving the house. Abby, I feel like maybe your writing career has eclipsed your baking career.
I think at this point, maybe it has. Yeah. It's funny because I feel like I'm known for so many different things and people don't always connect the dots. They're like, wait, you're the cupcake lady? And then the cupcake people are like, wait, you're the book lady? And oh, wait, you're Stuntman Mike's mom, which he's here, guys.
Oh,
Everybody always loves the
Listen.
Stuntman Mike. So.
Abby, do you want to tell us about your latest book, Part of Your World?
Yeah, so this is Part of Your World, and I'm very, very proud of this book. This is my best-selling, highest-rated book to date. It is about a 37-year-old ER doctor who falls in love with a 28-year-old small-town boy, and it's very much an opposites attract romance. She's got a very complicated life, and it doesn't really seem possible that these two could ever work out. But the journey getting there is super, super fun. So it's available, of course, at Belmont Books. So
it was also, I think, a staff pick. Me and another coworker had to
that's awesome.
get out over who was going to pick it. I graciously offered it up. So I'm just saying. And then lastly, we have Rachel Van Dyken, who is a #1 New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author of over 90 books, ranging from contemporary romance to paranormal. With over 4 million copies sold, she's been featured in Forbes, Us Weekly, and USA Today. Her books have been translated in more than 15 countries. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband, adorable sons, naked cat, and 2 dogs. I would love to hear more about the naked cat. Rachel, do you want to tell us about the Godparent Trap?
Yeah, the Godparent Trap is kind of like a flashback to like 90s rom-com style of these two people opposite attract, forced proximity. They're forced to basically live together and take care of these 2 small children after his sister and her best friend die in a car accident. And so the guy is like very straight-laced, very hateful, and just not the nicest person. And she's always been in love with him. And she's like this very like free, happy person that doesn't know how to cook, like Abby doesn't know how to do anything. Like she doesn't know how to make cupcakes. So she's like the worst in the kitchen. She DoorDashes like McDonald's every day. So it's just a really fun rom-com with like just, I think, the perfect amount of angst in it. I do not have it with me because I have been with a naked cat and both kids this morning. So like lipstick on at this point. But yeah, it just released a couple weeks ago, and it's kind of like my return to rom-com after all the mafia that I've been writing.
That's a good segue, Rachel, because I was very curious. You've been writing for a very long time.
Thank you for making me feel old. Thank you.
I know, I'm so sorry. Well, like when I was doing like research on like background stuff, I think I like found an interview that was at least a decade old about your transition to like full-time writing and stuff like that, and having worked in education. And 90 books, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of time and a lot of books. How do you keep, obviously you write in different genres, but like how do you keep the ideas going and like fresh and just like really present in like what's trending right now? Like how do you manage that after having so much in your backlist? I'm surprised you haven't run out of things at the moment.
I don't think that's the hard part. I think the hard part is just making sure that everything is fresh and you're not like repeating the same thing over and over again. I think my biggest fear would be someone saying that they read my Mafia, then they read something else and it all sounds the same, or it's not interesting anymore. And so for me, like writing multiple books or genres at the same time is how I keep myself from having writer's block. So I'll like write a paranormal and then I'll write like a historical, weirdly enough, or like, and I never read in my own genre. So I just always am trying to keep everything fresh. And I think that's the easiest way to do it. And have one book that you're on deadline with, and then another book that basically is just like the one that's for you, like your passion project. I mean, that's how I've done it. I think everyone has, these ladies obviously are going to have a different answer to that. Everyone has like what works for them. But I think what's important is staying true to that and not trend chasing and trope chasing, but making sure that you're doing what is going to resonate with readers versus what, I mean, at the end of the day is going to make you money. I think it's very important to make sure that you stay true to yourself and to your craft.
Now, with Danielle, this is your debut contemporary, but you've been working with books, you've been working with romance for quite a long time in your background. I know Sarah Wendell, the owner of Smart Benji Books, I believe you worked with her when you were at Source Books for her book on romance novels. So how does that translate for your writing with your experience?
I was Sarah's publicist for one of her books, which was really fun. She's great. But yeah, I think I want to piggyback off what Rachel said, where, you know, you need to kind of write the book you want and not get bogged down in the trends. And I guess with my background, I know that like the trends are constantly kind of cycling through. I think when I started working in publishing, in like 2008, I think was when I started as an intern at Sourcebooks. Like it was like historical was always, it was still there, but then like paranormal was it. Like that is all that was coming out basically. And not so many people were really writing or buying contemporary. And now, over a decade later, it's contemporary all day, every day at this point. Well, I mean, but obviously we still have historicals, we still have the other subgenres there. So I think when I started working on my book, I had always gravitated towards contemporary, and I knew that's what I wanted to write. So I just made sure I wanted to write the book I wanted to write. Like I know a lot of people say write the book you want to read, but I kind of change it a little and say write the book you want to write, because that can be different than the book you want to read. Like I also read outside, especially when I'm drafting. I don't read almost any romance. I'll read like a mystery or a thriller or something completely different. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I approached it, and kind of using my publishing background kind of always there. I didn't want to think about it too much because I know it's always changing, but it was always there in the back of my mind.
Now, Abby, all of your books are contemporary, but your couples always there's like a very relatable emotional thread for at least one, if not both of the characters, whether it's, dealing with like chronic pain or fertility, or in your newest one, kind of dealing with a very toxic relationship and also parental expectations. So how do you, one, pick an emotional thread that is both relatable and really tugs at your heartstrings, but balancing the lightness of kind of like finding love? And like romance isn't always angsty. You can have those really fun, goofy moments with like baby goats, just ruining the moment. How do you find that balance in your contemporary romances?
I mean, I tend to write sort of from like, I don't know, I guess my own heart, I guess you could say. I tend to process bad and hard things in life with sarcasm and like a little bit of humor on the side. So when I decide what my characters are going to struggle with, they of course have that same lens when they're viewing their circumstances. And sometimes, I don't know, it just comes to me in different ways. Like when I wrote the Happy Ever After playlist, I know I wanted to write about a character who was dealing with grief. And the best friend in that book, just sort of by default, because they always say like your first book is sort of like you know what I mean? That's the character that you're most inside of. And the best friend in that book, I sort of modeled after my best friend in real life because I was Sloan. And so the next book, Kristen's story, was going to be about a woman who dealt with infertility, because that was my best friend's real life struggle. So, I mean, sometimes it just sort of comes to me like that. Sometimes I know the character first, and then I ask myself, what kind of partner do they need? And then what is their worst nightmare? And then that's how I figure it out. Like for Life's Too Short, Adrian was the character that I knew first. I met Adrian before I, met Vanessa in my mind. And I knew that he was this very like A-type personality, and that he very much always had to be in control. And I thought, well, what is the biggest loss of control for somebody like that? And it's like, well, what if his partner was dying? You know what I mean? You have no control over that. It's just, there's nothing you can do. So that's the plot point that I gave them. And I really enjoy getting in these characters' heads. In my new and upcoming book, Yours Truly, the hero deals with anxiety, clinical anxiety. And that book just went out. Advanced reader copies just went out a few days ago. And the one thing that I keep hearing again and again is how relatable Jacob's anxiety is for everybody. And it was really easy for me to write him because I myself deal with a level of social anxiety. I'm extremely introverted. So writing Jacob just sort of like flowed out of me. But it was kind of interesting to see how much people related to that. I think it's been like the most shocking thing for me is how much people relate to feeling socially awkward or, nervous or, just anxious in general, which was kind of interesting to me. But, it's like once you know your characters, you sort of know what you have to put them through and what kind of partner they need. And that's kind of how I figure out what my conflicts and my overarching conflicts are going to be for my books.
So for you, you think like your characters come first, like in terms of an idea?
Yes, definitely. I always pick a character, and I tend to know one better than the other in the beginning. And I just ask myself, who is this person? What is their perfect partner? Because that's who I'm going to write for them. And then what is their worst nightmare? And so that's how I figure it out.
Rachel, what comes first for you when you're writing? Is there like one thing you always focus on, or does it really vary?
It's always dialogue, and I think it makes my editors probably want to kill me because I will just like randomly be like, conversation, dialogue, like it's really bad. And so it ends up like, for indie books, it's fine, right? For indie books, typically you can do that and get away with it. For traditional books, they're like, that ain't it, you can't do that. And so I always, Amy, my editor, always has to come back and be like, rein it in whenever I try to start off books like that. Just like I always try to like fight for a first person instead of third person point of view, which I always lose on that typically too. Yeah, I think a dialogue to me, like conversations are so interesting. Like I'm the person that has my headphones on, but there's like no music playing when I'm at the airport because I want to overhear conversations, because I think so many different themes and stories can start from conversations, from dialogue. Like you're walking through the airport, someone's having a fight and you're like, well, what are they fighting about? Like, what's their story? And so for me, like a lot of my stories have started just that sounds really creepy. Sorry, eavesdropping on people. That sounds horrible when I say it out loud, but literally like that has been, I've started many a story just being like, huh, that's cool. And then, just writing. So I think I'm very, as you know, dialogue heavy, very, very dialogue heavy, but I really like conversations, like things that just get people to continuously interact. And that's the human way, right? Interaction, constantly talking and discussing your feelings. And yeah, so that's my default that I go to, especially when I'm stuck on a story. I will just be like nothing but text messages to people on the pages or a dialogue on the pages. And then I go back through and I add in during revision. It's like what I probably should be adding, which is like, them eating, putting t-shirts on them, things like that. So yeah.
Danielle, what about accidental pinup? What started first for you for that?
It was definitely the characters. Yeah, for me, where I kind of just had, I don't know why. I kind of had the idea for my main character. Her name is Cassie. I had her as a person kind of percolating in my mind for a really long time. And then it was more just like, oh, she could be a cool photographer, and then, excuse me, like figuring out what would make her tick, as like, I wanted her to be like this very confident, beautiful, knows she's beautiful, knows that she does amazing work. And I was like, well, she's too perfect, right, as is. What will make her tick? And since she was a photographer, it was like, oh, she's the model. She's not used to that. So it was like, okay, then how can I like ramp that up? And it was like, oh, she's going to model lingerie, of course, in front of a really hot guy, So that was kind of how her character developed. And yeah, so usually it's the characters come first for me.
So this is like a multi-part question. Romance is built on a good trope, right? Whether it's enemies to lovers or, fake dating. I'm very curious if you have a favorite one that you like to read, a favorite one you like to write, and if there's just one trope that you just can't do well, or just like is the most difficult thing for you to read or write, that like, I don't love a friends to lovers. I feel like the stakes aren't high enough for me to keep the conflict going. But I love an enemies to lovers. I love two characters that like snipe and banter at each other when like their dislike is really just a cover up for, sexy pants feelings that they have. So Rachel, we'll start for you when it comes to tropes.
I love enemies to lovers. I love when the guy is so hateful, but redeems them in the end and you're like, they're the best in the world, but at the beginning you just want to like burn the book. That's my favorite. Yeah, and I love to read it, I love to write it. Yeah, anytime people are forced to be together and they hate each other is like awesome. I love it.
Danielle?
Let's see, to read, I really love Second Chance, because I think a lot of emotional labor like happens off page, like before the book. Like you kind of go in knowing, oh, like these people have this background. But yeah, so to read, it's definitely second chance to write. I really love Grumpy Sunshine, or kind of opposites attract. I just think, but I think Grumpy Sunshine specifically is just so fun. So the book that's coming out next year is a Grumpy Sunshine. I'm very excited about it. And then kind of the one that I guess I don't know if I can, it's like you say you avoid it, but then I thought of like 3 books that I read, but it's usually it's a Secret Baby. That's the one that like, and I don't think I could write a secret baby because usually you really have to just kind of go with the story, but then, and so I feel like it's one that's hard to kind of set up in a believable way, especially if it's contemporary. Like it's just like, why didn't you just talk about this baby? But but yeah, but then I've read some that I've enjoyed too, so I don't know.
Abby.
I love Enemies to Lovers, but I have such a hard time being able to write that because I do write such cinnamon roll heroes, and it's like you have to make it a believable conflict for it to be enemy. Like the guy has to be awful. You know what I mean? They have to truly hate each other. And I have such a hard time writing these super sweet, emotionally intelligent heroes and then figuring out a way to make them awful enough that it could carry that plot. So I don't think I've been able to really pull it off. There's a little tiny bit of that in yours truly, but it's resolved quickly. But I love reading it. It's so fun to read it.
I feel like for you too, like a lot of your characters are going through some pretty heavy emotional stuff, but if their romantic partner was a jerk about it, we're like, no, that's rude.
Yeah, not going to work for my heroes.
Of course, I feel like we should probably, I'm sure we have like budding romance writers in the audience. And of course, different techniques work for different people, whether you're a pantser or a plotter. What works for you, Abby? We'll just start with you.
I am very, very much a pantser, and like I've talked about this many, many times, but I don't write a single thing down. I completely write the book in my head over several months. I don't write anything down until I know exactly what's going to happen and exactly who these characters are. And then once I do know all of that, I have to write down a synopsis for my editor, because when I don't, she makes me rewrite lots of things. So that's the only reason why I will write down the story, like this is what happens, and I give her the whole thing, and then she gives me the nod, and then I finally sit down and start writing. But I find if I don't thoroughly know my characters in my brain before I start, I end up having to redo things. Because you can't even write a single scene unless you thoroughly know who they are. Like I use this example all the time, but like, let's say the 2 characters are sitting in a restaurant having a meal. Okay, well, what restaurant? Are they wealthy? Is it an upscale restaurant? Or did they stay out all night clubbing? Is it like a breakfast place like Denny's? What did they order? Why did they order it? Is she vegan? Like, do they drink coffee? Why don't they drink coffee? Are they having cocktails? Is one of them sober? Like, you can't even write a simple scene without thoroughly knowing who these people are. You're gonna have to go back and fix it. So I guess in one way I am a plotter, but only in my brain. And then I sit down and I write it out, and it just flows out by that time because I already know who they are.
Rachel, what works for you?
It depends on what I'm writing. For Mafia, I have to plot a lot because the book series goes back like a decade. So if I don't, then my readers will be
You
like,
have like a big document, like
Yeah.
a master document.
I do. I have a Mafia Bible in my house. It's kind of weird, but yeah, I have everything from like a family tree to their crests to everyone has a different weapon represented, like with a tattoo on their body in a specific place. Like it's very detailed. With contemporary, I'm more of a pantser because I like to see where the dialogue and the characters take me. Like everything that Abby said, completely accurate, because like one thing that I say is like, go into the kitchen. You're going to wash a dish different when you're a mob boss than you are if you're like a stay-at-home mom. Like you're going to wash it maybe more angrily. You're going to be like, you're going to do something different. And so I'm always like, go into the kitchen, become that character, do the dishes, and decide like who they are, how they're doing things, their mannerisms, their nervous tics. Like I have tons of little outlines where I will like write down like down to like a mole on their face. And so like I'll write, by pantsing, and then I'll go back in and add in all that stuff. Just because it's very overwhelming, like Abby said, to sit there and be like, is it a cocktail? Is it wine? Do they like red wine? Do they wine taste? Like what? You don't know. Like you literally do not know until you're in it. And when you're in it, you're like, cool, okay, I got it. But you have to know, otherwise you do rewrite. And I made that mistake yesterday and I had to delete like 20,000 words. So do not recommend. Yeah, definitely know what you're doing before you go in there.
So I just imagine like your husband walking in on you, like angrily vacuuming, and you're like, I'm method acting for this mob boss.
Yep. Yep, that happens often because he is the one that vacuums. So yes.
Danielle, how do you write?
I am a plotter to the extreme, like to the point where I'm plotting so much that it's like, you need to write the book. Like stop just like writing all of like but it is kind of like an info dump, like just getting it out of my brain, because it is in there. And I spend like months at a time just kind of thinking about things and really knowing, but then it's kind of like I will like just start describing things. And then it's like, okay, you have described this at length. You need to actually write it and not just summarize. But that, yeah, I think it's just, it's the process that at this point has worked the best. So.
And writing has its fair share of highs and lows. Like Rachel, you just mentioned you had to delete 20,000 words, which I feel like no one wants to do. But I'm very curious if you've had moments that you can remember in your writing, like a very high, whether it's like your book hitting a list or you like really nailing a scene of dialogue, to like something that you really struggled with in your writing. I'm very curious about kind of like the parallels. Danielle, we can start with you.
Yeah, so since this is my debut novel, I feel like I don't have, like, not that I haven't had great moments, but I don't have that many. But one thing that happened, and it was before my book was even out, and it was the cover had been revealed, and there were quite a few Bookstagrammers that cosplayed my cover, like before they could read it. Excuse me, the review copies weren't even out yet. So yeah, that was like phenomenal. I have to give props to the cover illustrator, Lenny Kaufman, who does absolutely stunning work. And, people really responded to it. And a lot of, especially women of color and Black women, were reaching out to me saying, oh my God, like this cover is gorgeous. Like it's a character who looks like me, or that, that's the person I've always like I've wanted to look like, or whatever, and it is kind of superficial, but to have that powerful of a response, before they even read it. And so many of them have come back and said, like, I finally read your book. Like it was, the cover matches the content. And, that's just, amazing to hear. And anytime I can, I would tag Lenny in the Berkeley art department, so yeah, that's like the highest high. And then, like a lowest low is like, it's just, I think when you get kind of like feedback that you don't like, I think the lowest low for me is like when you get feedback and it's about like having to change something from my editor, she's amazing. I love her so much, but you have to change something. And it's almost worse when it's like, well, she's right. I do need to change this, like instead of thinking that you just have it done and it's fine, but then that suggestion ends up being for the better, being for the better of the overall product. But that's always hard. I think criticism, even from someone who you trust and who's, who literally gets paid to do what they're doing, that can always be hard to hear, but really that's not completely terrible in the long run. So
I went to a romance event recently at Harvard Bookstore for Catalina Gamara's debut, Ben and Beatrice, which is a Taming of the Shrew retelling set at Harvard. And she mentioned that like with editing, it's like her editor knew which scenes she really loved, and like that was the one that is gonna get on like the cutting room floor, like the one that she like really loved to read. But she's like, she's right, it doesn't further the plot, I gotta drop it. But it's always that one.
Yeah.
Abby, what about you?
I write on my cell phone a lot. I use a Google Doc and I write on my phone.
That's insane. I hope you know.
You know what? It is awesome because some of my best memories are like not sitting like in front of my laptop writing. Like for example, I remember I was at a soccer game for my kids and I had the idea. I was like, ooh, I should add songs. I should make a playlist for the Happy Ever After playlist and add a song on every chapter. And I sat there at this soccer game on my phone and started adding songs onto each chapter. I remember being at a Paramore concert and I was working on the Happy Ever After playlist, the final edits. And I was like, ooh, and I had an idea at this Paramore concert and I updated it on my cell phone. And then the infamous ring light scene from Part of Your World, if you know, you know, I was floating on a tube in the lake researching that scene. And it's like, I have so many great memories of me like walking in the park and writing this book, or, you know, it's so cool to be able to just do it anywhere and not have to be just sitting in front of my computer. So I think writing on my phone has created some of my highest highs in terms of writing, just because I associate some of these really great ideas that I've had, or these really great chapters or lines that I've written, with these wonderful places that I was at the time. And it lets me be creative wherever I'm at. Really low lows. I mean, yeah, getting your stomach always drops when you get your edits from your editor. Like every time it just drops. Like you're just like, man, because you know it's going to be, you know, you're not going to be happy. And you do come around to it because, you know, they have such a great global perspective, and they do what they do for a reason, and they're good at what they do for a reason. But every time you get your edits, there's always like this dark moment where, you know, you need like a day or two to process what they're telling you. So yeah, that's probably where my lows come from, for sure.
I would also personally love if you could put footnotes of like, Abby wrote this scene while floating in a lake, or like just to add some extra perspective.
I should. That would be so funny.
Rachel, how about you?
You do like an extended version. I like that.
Yeah, and
We'll
like
read that
footnotes
saying,
and everything.
like, highest highs. I think it changes depending on, I don't know. It's changed a lot over the years. I think at first it was like, I want to be in stores, or I want to like hold my book in my hands, or be at an airport, which has never happened. I'm like, you know, fingers crossed one day, but like, or be, I don't know, like listing, like movie, like stuff like that. But I think it just changes. And I think for me, like my perspective has changed. I'm 37 now, so it's changed since when I first started writing, you know, 11 years ago. So now I think it is really just getting the book done. Right now I'm in survival mode with a 21-month-old and a 7-year-old. So I am like, oh my gosh, I wrote 20 words, like, good job. You know, like that's really where my highs are coming from right now. The fact that I can do what I love and actually sit down and be with my kids and write, without my little guy, like trying to press the delete button every 2 minutes, which is also super fun. It's like his favorite button. I'm like, how'd you even find it? You can't read. No one knows. But I think the lowest lows come from, at this point, not being able to write, having to like take a day where it's like, okay, it's summertime. Like I have to be present. I have to be here. Like I have all these ideas in my head. So like, I've kind of gone back old school, and now I have like, this is ridiculous. I have like notes all over like my table outside, all over my house. My poor husband is probably like, and yeah, so I have to take like notes old school style, everywhere. And that's kind of how I'm like processing things better. But yeah, I think it changes. Obviously reviews are never fun if they're bad, but I think they can also be very good, to help you become better at what you do. And so I tend to read all the bad reviews, which is probably very unhealthy, but I do it anyway. And yeah, and I think it just changes, like as you mature, as you age, as your career, as you get more books under your belt. So I think no matter where you're at, there's going to be a different answer probably for this year than I would have next year, you know, when I'm in a different place.
So it is 1:33 Eastern. We have several questions pending, so we can transition to questions in like 5 to 10 minutes in case anyone has any that they want to put in the queue. So we'll just ask a few more questions from me. Of course, what are we working on next? I know yours truly arcs have started going out in the world. Abby, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so if you read Part of Your World, yours truly is Brianna's book, which is the best friend of the main character in Part of Your World. And everybody really wanted a Doug book. We're not getting a Brianna love story with Doug. We're getting a hero named Jacob Maddox. And Jacob is extremely introverted. He deals with clinical anxiety. And Brianna is sort of like at the worst point in her entire life. Her little brother Benny is in kidney failure and on dialysis and in need of a kidney transplant. She is on the final stages of her divorce. Her best friend has gotten married and moved 2 hours away, and she's just really living like the worst period of her life. And in comes Jacob Maddox, and he's this very quiet, very reserved man, and they initially don't hit things off in the best way. And he ends up writing her a letter, and she writes him a letter back, and he writes her a letter back, and it turns into this really great bantery letter writing back and forth. And Jacob decides to be Brianna's little brother's kidney donor. And he does this in secret, doesn't want her to know. 12 hours later, she finds out about it, like immediately it gets out. And he asks her for a favor in return. He needs a date for his little brother's wedding. So, and all of this is back jacket cover stuff. None of this is spoilery. So it's a fake dating, friends to lovers book. And it's just so great. Like everybody always asks me, who's your favorite hero that you've ever written? And I always say it's the next hero that that's coming up. But honestly, Jacob is he's so great. He's just very relatable and just a really good human being. And I'm just really excited for everybody to meet him. Rachel was saying, like, looking at the reviews, I only look at the reviews in the very beginning because it is not a good place to be. I check it out right in the very beginning because everything that you get right out of the gate is just going to repeat itself again and again and again till the end of time. So it's like if you kind of just look at maybe the first 100 reviews, what people are thinking, how the book is being received, and then you can be done and just walk away from it. And the reviews are so fabulous. I'm really pleased to see that everybody is relating to Jacob's social anxiety on such a deep level. So. And just the arcs just came out on Wednesday. So that's really exciting that I'm getting such great feedback so quickly.
Rachel, how about you? Or how close to 100 books written are we?
Me?
Yeah.
I think I'm at actually 125 at this point.
You need to update your bio.
I know I need to. I just haven't. I'm sorry. Again, survival mode. So we have not updated really anything to get on that. No. So right now I'm working on a book that has not been announced yet, but it's a fantasy novel. So new adult fantasy, very high concept. We haven't announced it yet, so I don't know if I could talk about too much about it, but really love it. It involves Norse mythology. So, which I'm Norwegian, so it's kind of like close to home for me. My grandpa came from Norway. So anyways, I'm really excited to write it. And I haven't done fantasy in a really long time, only paranormal. So really pumped. And then I'm working on 2 new adult books right now. One releases in October. I had to think about that, called The Perfects. And another one releases about a month before that with Patty Singer. We wrote a book together called Compelled, and it's a paranormal fantasy as well. And that releases actually next month. So still working on the edits for that one, which is kind of cutting it close. But yeah, so I'm kind of just all over the place. I kind of redid my release schedule, and I'm kind of waiting, as you guys know, for dates from the traditional stuff for next year because I don't want to get in trouble. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, so I'm just on the new adult indie stuff right now and waiting for the other ones to get announced. Yeah.
Is the fantasy one indie or is it
that's why I'm like, I don't know if I can talk about it. No,
that's exciting. No, it's okay. Danielle, you offhandedly mentioned that you will have another one next year.
Yeah, the next book comes out next year. It doesn't have an official title yet or an official release date, but it is connected to the Accidental Pinup. It is 2 side characters. So one of Cassie's fellow coworkers, her name is Sam. She's very, very grumpy. I don't know if people are going to like her very much. At least
I love a grumpy heroine.
I know is my favorite. She is, and she's kind of just grumpy just because. And then the heroes from book 1 read his younger brother Russ, who makes kind of an appearance later in the book. But he immediately is obsessed with her. And there's a line where she's like, "What is with this guy?" And I was like, "That's it. You too. You're next." And so that comes out next summer, and it definitely takes place. It takes place in Chicago again, and it's on kind of the street festival circuit in Chicago. Every weekend, all summer, there are street festivals. You have somewhere to go. So there's a food truck that he is working on, and then there is kind of a photo booth bus that's also going to go with the boudoir photography studio, and they're going to go to the festivals and interact.
I love a grumpy character paired with someone who just thinks the sun shines out of their ass. And they're like, "Why do you like me? Leave me alone." They're like, "You're just so great."
Yeah.
And then one final question from me is that what books are you loving and you want other readers to know about? Danielle, we can start with you.
So I have 3, and because I am drafting something totally new, I've been reading a ton of historical romances and also just historical fiction in general. I just read 2 books that come out on Tuesday. I finished them in the last week. I read Heartbreaker by Sarah MacLean. It is absolutely lovely. I don't even know how else to talk about it. And then also To Catch a Raven by Beverly Jenkins. another book that you just, it's like, can I make coherent thoughts
It's
about
like
how great-
heisty. It's a good
yeah,
like
there is.
heist
There's kind of a
novel.
caper. There's kind of a caper in both of them,
Yeah.
actually, you know, and they're really fun. I mean, obviously, these are like two top historical romance authors who, and I've read everything they both have written. So yeah, highly recommend. And then I just started yesterday, The Secret of Bow Lane by Jennifer Ashley, which is a historical mystery. It's, I think, the fifth book maybe in her like Cat Holloway. She's a cook in a London house, and it's really great, really, really fun.
Rachel, book
Um,
recommendations?
So I'm going to recommend something that is kind of just like, I love Ruby Dixon. I'm just going to say it. I
Yeah.
adore the Ice Planet Barbarian books. They are like, whenever I have writer's block or I'm like stressed out, I'm like, I'm going to read about blue aliens. So I recommend her books all the time to people because to me, they're just so well written, so easy to read, funny, just I could never, like, I would love to write an alien romance and I would fail. I would be horrible at it. But she does such a good job and they're so good. I know that recently, I think she just got a book deal, right? And I know she's going crazy on TikTok right now, but
Yeah.
if you want something that's just gonna like, you have like a billion books to choose from too. There's like, I don't even know like what 60
The
in
new
series.
covers are beautiful.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like she's just so talented. And I always just like gush about her books. And the other one would be Lauren Lane. Any of her contemporary romances are ridiculously good. And I adore her as a person, but her writing is just very fresh and funny and flirty. And so any of her books, I would recommend too.
It was funny. I think it was Wednesday. I had a customer come into the store. I was like, I want a slutty beach read. I'm like, I got you. And I immediately pulled out Ice Planet Barbarians and she like balked at me. And I like tweeted, I was like, don't ask me for a slutty beach read
Yeah.
if you're not gonna read Ice Planet Barbarians.
She got what she asked for. So like, but you know that she's gonna read it and come back and be like, give me all of that.
I've staff picked it in January, and there's one customer who from now on like pre-orders the next like new trade release.
Yeah.
Abby, what books are you loving?
So I was gonna say, I think it's funny that both of you ladies are like, I can't read romance when I'm writing romance. And it's so true. Like I do a lot of blurbs and my blurbs are always for romance. So it sort of feels like work, you know? So when I'm ready to rest my brain, I want to read something outside of my genre. And I usually reach for a lot of like historic nonfiction, that kind of thing. But right now what I'm reading is called The Measure. It's by Nikki Ehrlich. I hope I'm saying her name right. And it's so interesting. It's about a world like ours, where all of a sudden everybody gets a box delivered on their doorstep, no matter where they are. You could be in the Sahara Desert camping, and this box shows up at the same time for everybody all across the world. And in that box is a string, and that string is how long your life is going to be. And so everybody finds out all at once how long they're going to live. And it's just how it changes society and the new prejudices that arise, and, you know, all of the different, like, you know, all the different questions you would ask yourself, like if you're a long stringer and you know you're going to live to be 90, do you want to be with a short stringer who's going to be dead by 30? You know, who gets the job? You know, somebody who's a short stringer or a long stringer? Do you go to college if you're a short stringer? I mean, there's all these questions that now have come up because of these boxes, and it's just a really interesting read, and it's narrated by Julia Whalen. So that's what I'm reading right now, and it's very good.
Julia's an amazing narrator. And she also has a romance that just came out.
Yes.
With an audiobook narrator, I believe, as the main character. Pretty meta. So we're going to transition to questions. We'll start with Tom's. What's your advice for romance writers when it comes to finding and creating chemistry between your main characters? Abby, we can start with you.
You know, I find that inside jokes are like so important. I realized in particular with yours truly, that whole book is just one big inside joke, and you as the reader are in on it because, you know, you're there as these jokes and these, you know, little things are being set up between the characters. But I really like inside jokes between characters. I think it creates bonding and creates sort of like their own universe. So that's how I like to build chemistry.
Rachel?
So for me, I watch a lot of Korean dramas, a lot of C-dramas, read comic books and stuff. And one thing that I've always noticed that they do better than any American TV show will ever do is it's all about like the lingering look. It's all about the soft touch on the neck. And like they somehow make holding hands like the sexiest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. I don't understand how just like a slow, you know what I mean? And you're like, like you gasp, grab the pearls. So Tom, I would say that go into watching, like taking a chance and watching a couple of those dramas and getting a notebook and then sitting down and being like, why do I like this? Like, why is there so much chemistry here when they're not even saying any words? Disney also does a great job at this. Sometimes they won't even have anyone talking. It's just like a lingering glance. And that's a very easy thing to put on the page, but it's something that when you're writing and you're in it, you don't think about that. You think about, well, there has to be words, or I have to force that sexiness or that chemistry. But I think it could even be in just like a glance or a touch. Bridgerton, they did a really good job with that with the Jonathan character. Like he looks and grabs her neck, right? And you're like, whoa, like that is so sexy. And the chemistry is there in that. And it's such a simple thing to do. So I think the problem with us writers is we overcomplicate everything, right? Because we're like, it has to be here. They have to read it. But you can make that and describe that in a way that is very, 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 very sexy, where you're not even overtly doing something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Danielle?
I always try to have my characters, like, even if it doesn't end up in the book, I like make them go on a date, like, and try to like, and in both this first book and then the second book, these date scenes did end up in there, but I've drafted other things where I've just like, I just need to see them, like how they would be like going into like knowing this is a date, like we're going out, like we're going to be together. It's not just like a situation where they're flung into and then they end up liking each other, you know? And so, yeah. And I think that kind of establishes like the dynamics in their relationship a little bit, even if I don't know that yet. It's more like, oh, this is how she would react to this question, or that he would open the door for her, you know, like just like those little moments that happen. And that really tells me a lot about how they interact together, which I think then leads to kind of creating the chemistry between them.
This question is for Abby from Therese, who really wants to know how you come up with all of your animal names.
Oh, no, I don't know. Like Harry Poppins, the geriatric toothless chihuahua from Life's Too Short. I literally do not know how I came up with that name. It just popped in my brain. And then, you know, now all my dog names are kind of funny. Like, you know, the dog in yours truly, his name is Lieutenant Dan, and he's missing a leg. You know, so I don't know, like, I think I hear names and I just sort of catalog it in my brain now and write it down for future use. But, you know, I would really like to name a dog Jake from State Farm. You know, I just think that's like the funniest name, but I have to find like the right book for it. There's a cat in yours truly, and his name is Cooter. You know, because like, you know, 3 college frat boys found this cat and adopted it. And so of course they're going to give it some stupid name. But yeah, I don't know. I just write it down when I hear of a funny name and I plug them in as needed.
Pamela wants to know how you create stakes for your characters. Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about this a little bit when I talked about Cassie, but yeah, it's like, what's going to make this person tick and why, and really like kind of thinking about that. And, you know, so like with Cassie, it was like, oh, she's a photographer. Okay. She's gonna be the model. Okay. She's gonna be a model in lingerie, you know. And with Reed, it was kind of like, he is already this established photographer, and here's this like kind of newcomer who's like, you know, he should just be able to walk in and have this job, and now he has to work with her. And then he realizes, oh no, she deserves to be here, like she really should be the one in charge. But then grappling with that and his own professional experiences and, you know, figuring that out. So really, I think for me, it's always like, how can I kind of turn it up a notch more, like, and how far can I push it? Because you can always rein it back in.
Rachel?
I think I always think what's the worst possible thing that they could go through after you character, like what is, like basically you take them to hell and back, and what is the worst thing you can do. And I know there's like this research done on the best-selling books of all time, and every single one of them had up to 5 different arcs in the story, to where it's like you up it, you go here, and then it's kind of like everything's fine, and then you go here, and then everything's fine. And almost every single book was on like the 90% scale of having those different arcs. And so I always think like, what are 5 different things that I can do that's going to make this character just break them? And then I've been learning screenwriting. I've been writing a pilot, and my one producer friend was like, you have to know like what is going to be the worst thing that could happen to them, because you have to break that character down so hard, because then the other person has to come in and build them up, or they have to maybe find themselves, build themselves up. So it's really about ruining the character's life and then coming back in and making sure that you redeem everything and everything's okay. But that's good movies, you know, that's good movies, that's good TV, that's good books. Yeah, and I think it's different obviously for every character, because every character is different. So
Emmy, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback what Rachel said, and then what I said earlier. So, you know, I figure out who my character is and who their perfect partner would be. And then I figure out what their worst nightmare would be. And, you know, for example, in Part of Your World, Daniel and Alexis's worst nightmare is leaving their respective worlds behind, because they have so much responsibility over their two worlds. So those are the stakes. And you know, if you just figure out, like, what, just like Rachel said, what is the absolute worst thing you can do to them, and then do that, or make that what they have to do to be able to be with the other person, you've got your stakes.
We're gonna do Helen's question, who wants to know if you have any advice for someone who's writing their first romance novel. I feel like, Danielle, this is closest to you.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice?
Write the book. Because that is the hardest part. I think, you know, we all have busy lives and other things going on, and it's so easy to get bogged down in social media or just whatever, you know, watching TV, like, you know, anything. But really, I mean, my advice is, if you have a story that you want to tell, you have to write it. That's the only way anyone's gonna be able to read it. So just sit down and write it.
Abby, any words of wisdom for first-time writers?
You know, I always talk about Critique Circle. I cannot stress it enough. I came into my writing career with absolutely no background in writing. I never went to college. I took creative writing in high school. That was it. And when I decided that I wanted to start writing down these stories that I had in my brain, I went on to a website called Critique Circle, and it has every resource you can possibly need: how to self-publish, how to get an agent, how to write a query letter. And there's specific cues for every genre of writing. So there's a romance queue, and you submit your chapters in this queue. And in order to submit your chapters, you have to read other people's work. So not only are you getting feedback from other members, but you're reading how other people are writing their romances and seeing what works for them. So I can't stress it enough. If you're a budding author, get on Critique Circle, because it will help you so much. I credit it with the fact that I'm here today. If I hadn't found that site, I wouldn't be here today.
Rachel, any advice?
I think my biggest thing is make sure you're not deleting things and going back over and over and over again over the same chapter, because kind of like when you take like a multiple choice test, a lot of times your first response reaction is correct, right? And then you go back and you're like, no, maybe it's B or it's C instead. You erase it, and then you like fail your test. Same thing with writing. I think going back and making sure that you know what you're writing about, you know, like just to refresh your memory, but don't go back and start deleting things, deleting paragraphs. Like I have friends that they have like 20, 30 manuscripts, but they're all half done, half finished, because they just don't, they're like, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. Well, it's never going to be good enough. Trust me, your editor will tell you that, like straight up to your face. So, and you're going to have someone that's going to revise it for you. So I always say, write linear, write straight through. And then you can go back in and add chapters. You can always fix things. You're always going to have an editor that's going to help you. Even if you self-publish, if you traditional publish, you're going to have someone that's going to help you get through that part. So other than that, everything they said, yeah, having a good critique circle, having a good, excuse me, beta readers, really important. Yeah.
We have a couple questions about how your inspiration takes place for characters. One in particular wants to know if anyone inspired the personality of Jacob for yours truly, Abby.
So I was watching this Turkish rom-com back when I started writing yours, or right before I started writing yours truly.
Is that the one that was like on social media, on Twitter? Like,
you know what?
That one?
Called Sen Cal Campini, I think is what it was called. And Turkish TV, you're not allowed to kiss on TV. There's huge fines for kissing on TV. So they really have to do a great job. Like Rachel was saying about Korean TV, you have to do a really great job building up this tension and this angst without a lot of physical interaction between the two characters. And there is this, you know, the main character, the hero in that show is this actor, Kareem Bursin. And he just has this very intense, like quiet intensity about him. You could just tell, like, there's so much going on with this character, like, that he's not saying. And he does such a great job of relaying it with his expressions. And he was very much the basis for me for Jacob. And if you're in my little, reader group for yours truly, I did share some photos of him, and you can just see like what I'm talking about. Like there's just so much going on behind those eyes. And I just thought to myself, like Jacob would just be very introverted, and he would be an incredibly complex, deep individual, that you really would have to chip away at to get to know. And I think people that struggle with anxiety, social anxiety, and who are introverted, that's a lot of times how they are. They come off as being flat or dry or disinterested or aloof, and really they're anxious. You know what I mean? You have to make them comfortable and, have quality interaction with them to get to know who they are. And so that's sort of like where Jacob came from. And I myself deal with anxiety. If you've read this book, the anxiety feels very authentic. It's because I get it. Maybe not to the degree of Jacob, but I do get it. I'm really introverted, and I deal with a lot of social anxiety too. So it wasn't too hard to place myself in Jacob's shoes. But yeah, check out that rom-com. You're gonna have to read subtitles, but it's just so well done. And I very much drew from that to sort of create Jacob as a person.
Rachel, how do you get your character inspiration?
Kind of everywhere. News stories, news articles, which sounds kind of nerdy. Watching TV, just like, gonna piggyback on her, like just like what she said, like Abby said, watching certain shows, certain lead characters and dramas and being like, oh, that'd be interesting. Or I honestly do not watch a lot of like popular TV shows here in the States. Like I always go like overseas, because I feel like there's just so much more there, and you're forced to pay attention because you have to read the subtitles, right? So like you can't just like fall asleep. I mean, and I love watching like Friends and stuff. You can fall asleep to that, right? Because I know every episode. But like those other series, like you have to really pay attention. And again, they're very, very clean, as she said, because they typically can't have a lot of like stuff like showing. So anyways, I really do take a lot of that. And actually, like my last book that I did write, I took a lot from the one K-drama I was watching. So, and the one I'm watching right now, which is a fantasy one, I'm actually studying it. So yeah.
Danielle?
Yeah, I would say everywhere. I mean, I'll see a photo, and it may not even be of how someone how the character actually looks, but it's just like, if it's two people in a photo and it's like it inspires a scene, or news stories, or reading, like a lot of times when I'm reading a book, I'll pay attention to like kind of like what's going on in the background. I'll be like, I want to know more about that person, and then like kind of just like imagining in that way. So yeah, it's like and I think a lot of writers that will relate when you say, you're just like, you never know what's going to inspire you or what's going to plant that seed of an idea, and you go from there.
Vanessa wants to know if anything sparked your desire to become authors. Where does that passion come from? Danielle?
I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a writer. I think probably from the time I realized that someone wrote a book, like, and then I got to read it, like that was when I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So it's really been like kind of a lifelong idea in the back of my mind, being like, I'm going to write one day. And I think that's probably why I've worked in books for as long as I have. And just kind of being in that world, and then being able to actually do it really is a dream come true. It's so fun. So
Abby?
I've read romance my whole life, and I felt like there was this type of romance that I was chasing, that I maybe saw little glimpses of it, in one book or another book, like one author would do one part of it really well, and another author would do another part of it really well. And I really wanted to create my own story that was a story like the ones I was trying to find, where all of these, things were all in the same place. I wanted the book to be really funny, but also have a lot of depth. I wanted the characters to feel like they're people that you could know. But, they're also, the book is really tropey at the same time, you know what I mean? But in a realistic way. And so I decided to write my own. And I was just doing it for fun. I never thought in a million years that I would be a published author, like never in a million years. It's absolutely wild to me that I'm here today. So.
Rachel?
So I was a therapist right out of college and started having panic attacks, for good reason. Obviously, I was only like 21. And I reading was my escape. It was what I did. And I just one time after having a session with a couple girls, middle school girls, I like went in my office and I cried and I was like, I don't know if I could do this anymore. And I just started writing. And it became my own therapy. So reading was also therapy, but the writing became like me just like pouring myself onto the pages. And I sent it into a publisher on a whim thinking, I want to do this. And everyone rejected me for, again, good reason because it was horrible, but I just kept trying. And finally a publisher took me in and told me that you need to put chapter headings on your pages and do all the other things I wasn't doing. Right. But hopefully it was good enough that they were like, hey, this is funny. We can work with her. So yeah, I soon became published right after that. And the rest is history. I worked for 2 more years and then I quit and I started writing full time.
So we have 2 more questions. We'll go with Tony's, who wants to know, how do you decide what to keep and what to remove from your books? And I think, Rachel, you mentioned like deleting a big chunk of a book. Like, how do you decide when you need to like take something out?
For me, it's when for me, a lot of times the story changes, which I think that's normal for all of us. It changes. You get to like 60,000 words and you're like, I don't really like this anymore. Like, it doesn't make sense, or like it hasn't gone far enough, or like, what's the big conflict? And for me, like I had 2 conflicts, which again, did not take negative advice and was like, I need more, like I need to heighten the stakes here. Like, this is not enough to keep people interested. Plus like, it's very, very angsty because they're younger. So there needs to be more like, my life is over and it's ruined. And so I went in and deleted those words. I will say this, I deleted them, but I still keep them and copy and paste onto my style sheet. So they're not gone forever. So then what I do is I go back and I can piece things back together if I need to, because it's not like the scenes were necessarily bad. They just weren't pushing the story forward. So I think that's the biggest thing. If it's not pushing your story forward, create a secondary character, create more dialogue, create something that's going to cause it to push. Otherwise, it's something that's not necessary on the page and people are going to get bored.
Abby?
There's a lot of different points in which I will delete something. Typically on my first drafts, I delete almost nothing. I go in having the story completely in my brain. I know exactly where it's going. I know exactly what's going to happen. It's very rare that I delete anything. Usually when the deletes come is when my editor sees it and then tells me her thoughts. And then that's when I have to delete things and rewrite it. And it changes from every book. Like The Friend Zone was published almost exactly as it was written. The Happy Ever After playlist, I had to delete the entire ending, 35,000 words, and redo it. Again, Life's Too Short was almost completely as I had written it. Part of Your World, I rewrote that ending 4 or 5 times. Rewrote it so many times. I could not get it right. It was really very challenging. So, I mean, it changes for every single book. And it depends like on if I'm seeing what my editor is seeing, or if, I knew like instinctually something was wrong with it, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And then, after the betas get a handle of it, and they give me their feedback, and then I start to go, okay, I think I see what you're talking about, but it just depends.
Danielle?
Yeah, my first drafts are usually pretty like sparse in regard, like I just need to get the story out, kind of get the bare bones. And then I go back in and I'll, when I'm revising, going over it, I'll add more of those details or kind of expand on conversations or whatever's going on in a scene. And then it's usually when I go back to that, then I'm like, okay, you're kind of just like you're piecing it all together, and you may take stuff out, you may move something around. Yeah. And then you have kind of, when you have an editor, you have that added extra set of eyeballs that, you usually have to go back in and rewrite definitely something. So yeah, that's kind of my approach.
And then the last question, not writing related. What do you like to do when you're not writing? Danielle, I know you mentioned dabbling in some crafting. What do you like to do when you're not writing?
Yeah, I do. I do try to craft. My pandemic hobby was I took up watercolor painting because I was like, what could I do? And I went on YouTube and I just follow some tutorials. So that really is my creative escape. It really, because my first creative endeavor, writing, became my job. I needed something else that was purely creative. My mom is like, you should sell these on Etsy. And I was like, no, like this is just, I'm going to send them to my friends and my family, because I make them into cards, and it's really, and it's very fun. But yeah, that is what I do when I'm crafting. And then when I can, I try to watch TV. I've rewatched The Bear, which is on FX on Hulu. It's so good. Everyone watch it. I'm obsessed. I can't stop talking about it.
Abby, what do you do when you're not writing?
I cook a lot. I post TikToks about my dogs a lot. But what I'm going to be doing coming up in a few days is I'm going to be fostering some kittens for Bitty Kitty Brigade. I've been wanting to do it for a really long time, and I wanted to do one, and I'm getting 3. So so look forward to that, guys. There's going to be a lot of really great.
Yeah, how are the dogs gonna feel about this?
These are orphaned babies. The dogs are going to just have to suck it up. I think it's going to be a blast, and I'm really looking forward to that. So,
Rachel, I know you mentioned you have 2 young kids. What do you do when you're not writing?
Lock myself in the bathroom and try to nap with a bottle of wine. I don't know. I do nap a lot, actually. Now I do, but right now I read. I love reading. Again, not in my genre, but I read if I have free time or I go outside. Writing is the fun part for me. So like right now, literally free time is my work time, which sounds kind of counterproductive, but it is what it is. I have really no choice at this point. So that's what I do. And then when I have like free time, I spend time with my husband and we go for a lot of walks, lots of bike rides with the kids. Especially now, just spending time outside, spending time together. My youngest is adopted. So I'm very, very hands-on just with him, just because of developmental stuff. And he's been kind of struggling a bit. So I've been really, really, really trying to just be present and be there. So I'm a very tired mama at this point, but it's only a season. It'll all get better. And so, yeah, I'm kind of all over the place at this point.
All right, well, that concludes our contemporary romance panel. Just as an FYI, you can purchase all of these authors' books through us if you'd like. We do ship throughout the US. Or support your own local independent bookstore. That is also amazing. Feel free to check to see if they have any additional goings on today for Bookstore Romance Day. Abby, may we see Stuntman Mike one last time if he is nearby?
He's never left.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Abby and Rachel and Danielle, and thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great rest of your Bookstore Romance Day.
Bye.
thank you for having us.
Thank you.